Hello, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started, and I'm sure people will trickle in. But I think, in the sake of time, it will be great to start. So, I am Shelby Bates. I am the Education and Outreach Program Coordinator for also the Colorado Initiative for Inclusive Higher Education. We are a nonprofit that really advocates for college access for students with intellectual disabilities in Colorado. I'll drop a couple links so that folks can see if you want to join us for a different webinar to really learn about what those college options look like in our state. But really, today we are here to learn about Medicaid waivers for adults with disabilities. And some of that will apply to college, and some of that is really just for like general life. So, Adam Tucker is our speaker, and Adam is with Healthcare Policy and Finance. We have been working with Adam, myself, and I think some of our school partners really to talk about like what Medicaid waivers can look like in college. And we're just really thankful to have someone who is actually with Healthcare Policy and Finance who can help kind of guide and answer questions for families and different things like that. So, Adam, if you want to do a more formal invitation, you can. Introduction, you can, but I think I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Shelby. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. The reason why I have my contact information on here, and let me just do a couple of like housekeeping things, is that the PowerPoint that you guys will have access to, Shelby, I don't know if you've sent it out or you will, that PowerPoint one is going to be much longer than this one that I'm going to use today. And really, I had to pare that down so just for the sake of time. And because my goal today is to give you some real basics and then really try to get into talking a little bit more about how waivers and ways to think about waivers and waiver services when somebody's in college. But I know that the audience here today, that there's going to be some different levels of understanding. One about Medicaid in general, but then also about home and community-based waivers. And so I kind of want to set the stage first, and then kind of open it up for discussion. So the other reason why I'm starting with my contact information is that also that PowerPoint has a different contact person on there, and her name is Jen Larson, and she is awesome. But she is a communications person at Healthcare Policy and Financing. And I imagine that most of the follow-up questions that are going to come from today is going to be about policy and how to make things work. And so I might be a better person for you to reach out to. And so I just really wanted to make sure that was front and center. Also, just a little hack on all State Department emails. If you need to get a hold of one of us and you have our first and last name, just put a period in between our first and last name and add @state.co.us, and that's for all state departments. So just as a little bit of a hack. The other thing too that I really want to make sure is that through this presentation, I'm going to go over and kind of just go over some real basics around Medicaid and waivers, and really to understand that. So that when you're thinking about waivers, you're thinking about how loved ones can access those waivers, or even yourself, it starts to make better sense if you kind of take this kind of global view, and then we can really drill down into things. But more formally, my name is Adam Tucker. I've worked for Healthcare Policy and Financing for close to 7 years now, and I am the Community Inclusion and Employment Policy Advisor. But prior to that, I was a case manager for years and years and years. And so I started my case management work down in Farmington, New Mexico, and I worked on the Navajo and Zuni reservations, working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, accessing waivers. And then after that, I actually spent about 5 years in Montana, working with individuals who had dual diagnosis of a persistent mental health disorder, as well as intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then most of those folks were also experiencing homelessness. So we were doing a lot of work around some of that. And then most recently, I worked for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless here in Denver, and worked again primarily with people with persistent mental health disorders as a case manager. And so I really do have a kind of ground level background in some of this stuff. I think the other thing that is pertinent to today and to the conversation that we have today is that I am also a lifelong special ed student. I was diagnosed with a significant learning disability from everywhere that affects me in math to written language. I also have ADHD, and then I have some invisible physical disabilities, and that allowed me and gave me the opportunity to be part of special ed throughout my whole schooling career, and even to today, I still use accommodations through college, and so I kind of come thinking about this less as kind of a policy person, even though I really like policy, but more about how do we design and make policy, either policy that's currently available or policy that we need to build. How do we make sure that policy is actually supporting people that need the support so that they can succeed, that they can be more independent, and that they can live a life just like everybody else can. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump in and kind of get going so that we can open this up and have a little bit more of a conversation. So when we're thinking about waivers, I really think the first thing, and another kind of acronym that you're going to hear a lot of times, is Home and Community-Based Services, or HCBS services. Those are waiver services. And so just also knowing some of that language can be really helpful. So really today, I'm hoping that through this little quick kind of PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to give here over the next 20 to 30 minutes, you're going to kind of understand not just kind of the basics of Medicaid and eligibility around Medicaid, but then how waivers kind of fit in with that, and then access to case management, have a better understanding of eligibility and kind of that enrollment process. The basics that I think are really important to understand is Medicaid is a really big system. But think of it like just a normal healthcare system. So if you have private insurance through Kaiser or through Centera Health or through any number of the private insurers in the state of Colorado, just think of Medicaid as probably as the largest Colorado insurer. And that's not necessarily something that we choose to be the largest. It just happens that we are the largest. And we were the largest before COVID. Now in the pandemic, we have grown even more. But just understand that really at the end of the day, we are an insurance company, and we are a medical insurance company. But part of that is because we're also we utilize taxpayer dollars, and we really do think of ourselves as civil servants. That also means that health insurance is really based on what we're seeing in the community and what the community really needs, and how do we set up our services to really try to support community members and citizens of Colorado and really achieving what they want to achieve in their life and see that independence. And sometimes that is through just making sure that people are healthy, but other times that really is around developing and creating systems that support people who would otherwise be institutionalized or find more segregated settings. And so when you're really thinking about this, think anytime that most people say Medicaid, they're going to say Medicaid, Medicaid state plan, Medicaid general, those kinds of things. What we're talking about when we say that, we really are talking about doctors, we're talking about pharmacy, we're talking about hospitalization, x-rays, all of that kind of stuff. All of those things, when you are a Medicaid member, all of those things are absolutely guaranteed that you have access to those things based on medical need. The other set, in the set that we're talking about today, are those optional benefits, which are home and community-based waivers. And what those are, we'll get into that here, but just think about that those are voluntary things that states can choose to opt into. And because they're voluntary, that also makes them a lot more flexible for states to actually engage with and actually kind of make sure that they're, or we're at least attempting to make sure that they are meeting the needs of the folks that live in the community. Again, really think about this also as a pyramid. So you have state plan, which is again the doctors, the pharmacy, hospitals, all of that kind of stuff. Then there's another set of services that the federal government mandates that all states also have, and those are long-term services and supports. Those things include things like nursing home institutions, but they also include things like home health. If you just need a nurse to come in and meet with you once or twice a week to check blood pressure and make sure things are going okay, maybe they'll help you with some medication, but that's really the extent of the services that somebody needs. That would be more covered under home health and not actually in waivers. And then the final at the top of that are home and community-based waivers. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. And so I'm not gonna delve in on this slide, but I do think it's a really good visual. So home and community-based services. I think the other thing that's really important to really set this up so that as we're having this conversation is that home and community-based services are a voluntary thing that states can absolutely adopt. 48 states out of the 50 have adopted waivers. There are 2 states that actually have waiver or waiver type services. They just choose to use what we call a different authority. And so they use under the Medicaid Act and Social Security Acts, we have different authorities that as states we can utilize to create these services. And Colorado chooses to use the home and community-based waiver authority to do this. Waivers are designed to support people who, if they did not have waivers, they would be living in institutions. This allows, because of home and community-based waivers, what this actually means is it gives flexibility to the states to not only waive certain Medicaid income and eligibility criteria. However, that is not as much of an issue in Colorado anymore because Colorado is a Medicaid expansion state. And under Obamacare, when you became an expansion state, a lot of that eligibility actually became a lot looser for general Medicaid. So when we're thinking about waivers, we're not even thinking about that as much. But what we are thinking about is how do we target populations in waivers to ensure that they're getting the right services in the right time that meet their needs so that they can still stay independent within their own community. That's really at the core what we are always working on. We're always trying to improve services in that way. We're always doing research in that way. That's the way that we think about waivers. And it's important to kind of understand where they sit within Medicaid, especially as you guys or families start to engage in this Medicaid system and where waivers are. It's important to know the medical is over here, the waiver stuff is over here. So the other thing that I think is important to really understand, and I think once you get this, it actually helps not only with really designing and advocating for the services that somebody needs through waivers, but it also helps you especially as college students who are going to get really active in stuff. They may want to engage in how do we make these services better. And so it's also important to kind of understand how our relationship with the federal government works within the waiver world. And so really what's going on with the feds is that we have an agreement called a waiver with the federal government, with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and they approve that waiver. We then take that waiver and then we create rules around that waiver. And then those rules, and then also mechanisms to reimburse providers for doing that. And then that's what actually people interact with when they're utilizing waiver services. So when we're talking to the federal government, there's a couple of things that we have to prove within waivers. And the first one is cost neutrality. And really what that means is we have to prove to the federal government that the aggregate, the group of people that are on the waiver, that they are going to be less expensive, or at least not any more expensive, to that same group of individuals being in an institution. So we always have to prove that. Now, that doesn't mean that on an individual basis, it has to be cheaper. It has to be cheaper on the aggregate. And in reality, this is the easiest part that we do. We know through research, we know through our own experience in Colorado, that supporting people in place and helping them be part of their community actually reduces costs overall around medical needs, medical supports, all of those different types of things. Now, there are still some outliers of individuals who may actually cost more to support in the community. That's totally okay. It's still better to be in the community. It is absolutely a fundamental right that people have access and are part of their community before they choose if they want to go into an institution or a nursing home. Sometimes people do need to go because there's acute medical needs or different things like that, and that's completely okay. But our goal, and it has evolved into this, is to make sure that people who are in nursing homes can get out of nursing homes as quickly as possible. The next thing when we're thinking about our agreement with the federal government is that we also have the obligation to make sure that people who are in the waivers have certain protections and that their welfare is part of the whole thing, that we're not just going to leave them out on the street and make them fend for themselves, as it were. The next thing is that the services are obviously provided to avoid institutionalization. That's exactly what I've been talking about under the cost neutrality. The newest one, and I think one of the biggest kind of leap in moving away from the classic kind of medical model of, waiver providers, waiver providers kind of coming in and dictating to people what services they're going to have, is the idea of person-centered planning. And that was just codified in federal law about 7 or 8 years ago. It was right before I started at HCPF. However, person-centered planning has been around for 15 to 20 years. I was first learned about person-centered planning and how to create a person-centered plan while I was working in New Mexico about 15 years ago. So it has definitely been around for a while. I think the biggest question people then ask is, well, why do we care if the feds agree with how we're doing these services and providing these services? Why is that so important? And the basic understanding and the basic idea behind it is that for every dollar that we spend on waiver services, or for every dollar that goes out and that is spent on waiver services, 50 cents of that comes from Colorado taxpayers, and 50 cents of that comes from the federal government. So we actually, when it comes to Medicaid and it comes to waiver services specifically, we actually get 50 cents. The federal government matches every 50 cents that we put forward. And so that's why that is so important, and why things like the electronic visit verification, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, or EVV, which nationally is a really controversial type of program. And in Colorado, we fully understand its controversy. It didn't stop us from the fact that we still had to implement it, because if we hadn't implemented it, we were at a significant risk of having the federal government come in and say, either we're not going to continue to give you the 50 cents for every 50 cents you put forward, or we're going to drastically reduce that amount. And so what we did is we tried to make it as least intrusive as possible. But a lot of times when you hear about stuff that HCPF is doing that may be controversial, and you can actually kind of see it in some of our faces when we talk about it, where we're like, yeah, we don't particularly like this either. It's not that we still have to implement some of this stuff because the federal government says that we have to. So moving on. Shelby, was there anything?
Yes, I forgot to tell people how to ask questions. So if you're okay, I will just give that information real fast. Yes. So there are two options for questions. You can either put them in the chat, and if you chat them to me, then I can kind of compile them and ask Adam, either if it's relevant while we're going, or can ask them at the end. And there's also a Q&A feature, so you are also welcome to ask questions using that. Both of those are at the bottom of your screen, and either one will work. They'll both make it to us. So sorry, Adam. Thank you so much.
Oh, no worries. No worries at all. All right, let's keep going on some of this stuff. So when we're thinking about home and community-based services here in Colorado, we really want to make sure that we are allowing participants to fully engage in their community and find independence. And over time, we are getting better at that. We want folks, we want to work with folks, and we want to support folks as they're doing things like go to college, like as they're doing things like go to work, as they're living a normal life. And that the goal behind the waivers is really based on the idea that, okay, what do you want to achieve in your life? What are the barriers that you're finding due to your disability? And then how can we lay over those services to help that person get over those barriers or move around those barriers? It's not that we're going to come in and utilize services that force somebody through one of those barriers. We want to support the person in finding their own ways to grow and to move and to get over and build upon their successes around those. So again, waivers are not designed to come in and dictate to people what their life is going to look like or any of those types of things. Now, there are problems within our service system that if you're not diligent, those things can happen. And when I say diligent, I'm just saying that you just need to advocate. You need to, the biggest thing that I always tell individuals who are waiver members about what they want to achieve and what they need to expect in the waivers is that, know what you want to do in 5 years, know what you want to do in 10 years, know what you want to do in a year, and advocate for that. Tell people these are my goals, this is where I want to see my life, and just keep driving at that. And the service system will come in line. Sometimes that takes a little time, but in the end, the service system will kind of come together and coalesce around that. And so I think for the audience that we're talking to today, we have 2 adult IDD waivers. And for that, what that really means as a waiver member is that it's all kind of, that means that there's a certain set of case managers. That means that there's a certain set of services, all of those kinds of different pieces. Now, what I will say about that is that just because you have an intellectual and developmental disability does not mean that these 2 waivers are the only waivers that are available to you. And so I highly recommend that as you're exploring waivers, as you're thinking about waivers, it really needs to start from what the individual wants to do in their life, and then really figuring out what are the best set of services that will work for what the individual wants to get out of and what they want to do in their own future, in their own life. And so here's a list of all the waivers in Colorado. I think we're now second in the most waivers in the United States. We used to be first, and then we got rid of one of our waivers because we just moved the services somewhere else, and that put us second. So again, that's not something that we brag about because that also makes it a lot more complicated to navigate our systems. And so we really are continuing to work to try to align service definitions and sequence services better with not just within waivers, but also with other entities in the state. And so that's something that we're always working on, but we're always open to hearing feedback about as well. Because one of the things about Medicaid, and I think it's really important to understand this as well, is that Medicaid is a reactive system. It's not it only responds when something pops up. We work really hard to try to kind of see what's coming down the pike and trying to get ahead of it. But in general, because there's so many things going on, our service system tends to be reactive. And so it's important that as you're looking at these things and thinking about them and supporting loved ones in this, that just because it's not happening right now doesn't mean that it can't happen even in the near future. And that's why we find it so important to always keep the lines of communication open. We want to hear about what's going on in communities, what's going on when people are living and working and going to school on college campuses. We want to hear about all of that because through that information, that's how we know kind of where we need to go next in developing and strengthening and improving policies that dictate how these services and supports are utilized in the state. So the three waivers I just want to point out really quickly are the Developmental Disabilities Waiver, the DD waiver. That's what you mainly hear it called, is the DD waiver. The Supported Living Services Waiver, or the SLS waiver. Those are the two waivers specifically designed to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Again, that doesn't mean that those are the right waivers for individuals that may be listening in today, or who are family members of individuals listening in today. The other one is also the Elderly, Blind, and Disabled Waiver. The Elderly, Blind, and Disabled Waiver is also the largest waiver. It doesn't have any more services than any of the other ones, but it does have some different flexibilities in them because it was designed a little bit differently. So if you're finding that the SLS waiver, the DD waiver, really isn't meeting the need of the individual or the individual that you're working with, you know, the EBD waiver really is probably the next one that you want to check out. And so I just really wanted to make sure that you guys knew that. Part of the PowerPoint that you guys will have is there will actually be a whole section of slides that get into more detail about each one of these waivers. And then also at the end of this, I can show you even to get a place where to even get even more detail about each one of these waivers as well. So I'm going to skip this question. Initially, I thought I was going to open up questions here. But again, I just want to get through the basics so that we can have a much more robust conversation here in just a few minutes. So when we're thinking about, or you're thinking about, how do I get involved in the waiver? How do I enroll? How do I make sure I'm eligible? How do I help my loved one in doing this? The first thing is to know is the agencies and what the different roles are. And so the first one here is us. And the state agency is that oversees all Medicaid in the state of Colorado as healthcare policy and financing. And then what we do is we contract with case management agencies around how to do, as case management agencies work on eligibility for waivers. They also support somebody in finding providers, as well as developing and creating the support plan and that support plan is really what all the services are based off of. So those case management agencies, and then also county eligibility offices. The county eligibility offices are the ones who really support people with figuring out their eligibility for Medicaid in general. So they're really looking at the financial side of things, whereas the case management agency is looking at the functional eligibility for the waiver enrollment. It's always really important when you're thinking about eligibility, and there's a slide, I believe that it might even be next, no, it's the next one after that I'll get into more detail about this, but it's really important to understand that once you are financially eligible for Medicaid, you are then eligible for everything else as long as you meet the functional need for it. You're showing that, yes, I have a disability where I need somebody to come in and help me do some personal care types of things, or I need some support with employment, or I need support going to school and figuring out how to integrate into my community and really be part of the college experience. All of those types of things only happen after that financial eligibility occurs. So that's important. The other thing that I just want to point out about this slide, that if you look at it too literal, that it might get confusing, is that with some case management agencies, they are also the county eligibility office. So they are one and the same. And so if you're working towards maybe going for the elderly, blind, and disabled waiver, depending on what county you're actually in, you might be working with the county office who will also be your case management office or your single entry point. So single entry points are one form of case management system in this state. And they're the ones who really oversee the non-IDD waivers. They're the ones who oversee the community, the brain injury waiver, the community mental health waiver, the children's life limiting illness waiver. So they kind of see all of the waivers except for the specific IDD waivers. The specific IDD waivers really go through the community center boards, and you're going to hear them called CCBs more than you're going to hear them called community center boards. But if you ever hear of a CCB, we're talking about one and the same. This is a system that was created a while back in the 50s and 60s, where there are, oh, I have it right here. There's 20 of them throughout the state, and they have kind of a geographic area in which they tend to oversee services and supports in that area. That does not mean that you have to go with that CCB. If you're a CCB, if you live in Colorado Springs, your normal case management CCB, while you've been going through high school, you know, you're in your first summer out of high school, you're getting ready to go to college, that CCB can remain your CCB even if you go to, if you're living in Colorado Springs and you go to Greeley and you go to University of Northern Colorado, that CCB can be the same CCB and can still support you at UNC with making sure that you have all the supports that you're going to need. The one trick with that I will mention is that it's important that if you are going to do that, that you're letting that CCB know soon enough so that they can make sure that you guys are working together to find providers in that new community. For them, a lot of times they're going to have to reach out to the CCB that's in that community to kind of learn about who the providers are in that area, but they're still going to absolutely be willing to work with you. It actually makes things a lot easier, especially if you come back for summer. You know, if somebody moves to their college town and they're going to stay there for the summer, and that's going to kind of be their home for a while, at that point, you may want to consider maybe switching your CCB. But really, if you're coming home for the summer, you're coming home for Christmas breaks, all of that kind of stuff, and you still need services during those times, it's much easier just to use your home CCB so that case manager and you can kind of work out how the entire year is going to go, not just while you're at school, but while you're at home for summer break, while you're at home for spring break, all of those kinds of things. And then there are also 3 private case management agencies. I don't know much about them, to be honest, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. So just so you guys know, the 3 private case management agencies really are kind of a new thing in Colorado, and it's awesome. It's great. New Mexico has private case management agencies, and it's an incredibly great model. And so it's really exciting that there's 3, and soon hopefully to be more. But I'm still just not fully caught up on that system and how that's working. So waiver eligibility really quickly. Again, like I was saying just a few minutes ago, it's really important to understand that the first set of eligibility that everyone has to work on and deal with is the financial piece of the eligibility. Currently in Colorado, that's, I believe, $2,000 for an individual and $3,000 for a couple. However, there are many different programs that change that around. There are buy-in programs that allow individuals to actually engage and become Medicaid eligible, even if they're making more than that, up to about $5,000 a month. And what they can do is they pay a small premium of I think the max on that is maybe $200 a month. And that small premium allows them back into Medicaid and therefore eligible for waivers and everything else. There is one waiver that is not eligible currently that we're talking about today, one waiver that is not currently eligible for buy-in, and that is the DD waiver. However, I do know there is a piece of legislation that was introduced last week that would add that buy-in program to the DD waiver. So that might be changing relatively quickly. The next step is once you kind of get the eligibility piece out of the way. Well, one last thing about the eligibility piece, the other way to kind of sock away money besides just doing trusts and things like that are ABLE accounts. And so I would highly recommend that if somebody does not have an ABLE account and they've had a disability, intellectual developmental disability that started at birth or pretty quickly afterwards, that to go and check out ABLE accounts. You can have up to $200,000 in your ABLE account, and that won't affect your Social Security or your Medicaid eligibility. And you're able to sock away. I believe the last time I looked at it was something like $20,000 a year, and that might be a little high. But you can put that amount of money and save that every year through an ABLE account. And the nice thing also about ABLE accounts is that that money is still accessible to the individual whose name is on that account, and they can use that money as long as it's going to them specifically, and for them to either be part of the community, to get services and supports that they may need, or even different technologies and different things like that. As long as the receipt, and you can really show we spent this money to support me, who has the ABLE account, and being more independent, that's absolutely okay. And that even goes down to if you go out to eat with a group of friends, you can pay for your own meal on the ABLE account. You can't pay for everybody else, but you can pay for your own meal using the ABLE account. So I always want to mention ABLE accounts as a really good way to support people who have limited ability to save money. This is a new way to engage and really save money. So I always like to mention that. Once the financial piece is out of the way, somebody is fully Medicaid eligible and they still need waiver services, the next step is that level of care. That level of care is really around functional, coming in and doing an assessment around somebody's what they're able to do and where they need support. And so that's done through in the IDD waivers, that's done through what we call the SIS, as well as the ULTC 100.2. That is going to be changing in the next few years. And we are in the middle of developing a new assessment tool that's going to be broader. It's going to move away from the SIS, because the SIS was not designed to do what we use it for. So we're moving away from that, and hopefully we'll do a better job at identifying what services and supports folks need, and so that we can tailor that even better than we do currently. And then finally, it really is about figuring out what case management agency that you need to work with, depending on what waiver you want to get enrolled in. I say all of that. That doesn't mean that you can't start anywhere. You can start with the CCB, and you want to go on the EBD waiver. The CCB will help you get in contact with the right people to do that, and vice versa. And so there is no wrong door. You do not have to worry about choosing the right store to go into. All you have to do is get inside one of the stores, and the people that are working inside that store will help you navigate to the right place, and will probably be really helpful along the way as well. So level of care, really quickly, when we talk about level of care, we're talking about does a person need hospitalization due to acute needs? That changes what types of services and support somebody can get. Are they that nursing facility level of care? That really is more for kind of long-term. There may be acute things going on. You're really not sure kind of what the future looks like because of the diagnosis or what's going on, but you need that level of care. And then finally, the true institutions, and we still have 2 of them in our state, and they are all-inclusive care settings, and they are not what the horror stories that we saw back in the 70s and the 80s around them. They provide incredibly good services. The staff there are highly trained, but at the same time, just because of the nature of those, community integration is a little bit more difficult. The things are a little bit more dictated and still kind of based on more of a medical model. And so all of these are the different types of level of care that waivers are designed to support somebody so that they can stay in the community. And then again, targeting criteria, like we were kind of talking about when we design waivers, we design them for a specific population with the supports and services that nationally or based on data, people within that population, like the intellectual and developmental disability population, may have. And so some of the targeting criteria that you'll see in our waivers is based on diagnosis mainly and age. There are a few, like a spinal cord injury waiver, which is a really, really small waiver that's also geographically capped to the metro area. But the rest of the waivers are all statewide, and we basically really only utilize targeting criteria around diagnostics as well as age.
Adam,
And then, oh, go ahead.
sorry, you might
Yeah,
be getting
please.
to this, but we have one question about just the general types of services that someone might get with a waiver if they have an intellectual
Sure.
disability. And if you're going to be
Absolutely.
getting to that, that's okay too, but I just saw it.
No, I think that's great. And actually, because we only have about 20 minutes left, I think this is my last slide. And I don't necessarily, I can leave this up and we can start going into questions and I'll tie this back in. So some of the services that are in the DD and SLS waiver. So the DD waiver is the one that has residential services in it. So they're the ones who have host homes and group homes. That waiver is really designed for somebody who truly needs 24 hours worth of care. So they need somebody around at night to make sure things aren't going haywire. Sometimes that's awake at night staff. Sometimes that's sleep at night staff. That's not also saying that on the supported living services waiver, the SLS waiver, that most of that same home health types of services, all of those are still actually in the SLS waiver. They're just kind of done a little bit differently. The biggest thing between the two waivers that I will mention, and I'll list out a couple of the services that I'm most excited about. The biggest thing between those two services is if somebody is really, the DD waiver is really designed for people who have really high behavioral needs or really high medical needs. And so it really is designed to support people who have tracheotomies, or they have violent tendencies due to behavioral issues, those types of things. Folks who really cannot be by themselves for very long during the day. Because it was designed like that, there's less flexibility in it than there is in the SLS waiver. And the SLS waiver is really much more designed for folks who don't really need that 24 hours worth of support. And what they actually need is they just need somebody there who can come in and check in with them, help them with personal care stuff, help them access the community and get out and be part of the community, all of those different types of things. So in those two waivers, some of the cool services that are there that I really think most people would use if they're going to college would be things like supported community connections, peer mentorship. Those are two different services, peer mentorship, and then there's also mentorship. All of those services really are designed to support people with being in community, accessing community, and also getting to know and build social capital within their community. Those are the types of services that somebody would utilize to go to a frat party on the weekend. Those are the kind of services that somebody would utilize to join student clubs. Like the different types of student clubs that are on college campuses. Those can also be utilized to support somebody with talking to their teacher or their professor, and also advocating for themselves within the classroom. And so all of those things can actually be utilized for that. There's also another set of services, the supported employment services, that can really support somebody in short-term and long-term job opportunities. Colorado is an employment-first state, and what that means is that Colorado has designated employment as a social determinant of health, which basically means that when somebody is employed, they're healthier, they're more integrated in their community, they have better access to getting out of poverty, all of those really great things. And so we really are moving our system to making sure that employment is actually something that is considered first and foremost over more traditional, more segregated types of services like a specialized habilitation, which is akin to kind of adult daycare type of thing. And that's not me trashing it. That's just how those services are. So with that, sorry I talked so much. I actually wanted to answer some questions. We got a couple in beforehand, so I can talk about those, but Shelby, tell me what you want to do.
Yeah, I think questions is great. So if people have specific questions, feel free to put those in. If you don't want to answer that, have your name shown, you can chat those to me and they'll be anonymous too, and we can do it that way. I think one thing that might be helpful, Adam, too, is for a student who maybe wants to live in an apartment when they go to college, are there some more like apartment living specific things that waivers can assist with? And I know several students who are using those waivers, but maybe you could talk about just like what those sorts of things look like.
Absolutely. And so in either of the two waivers that I'm specifically speaking about, the DD and the SLS waiver, both of those can support somebody living in their own apartment and or living in their own dorm. And on the DD waiver, it's going to take a lot more advocacy from the individual and from family members' point of view, because that service is called the individual resident support and services category of services. That actually is utilized a lot less than group residential settings or host homes. And so just know that it's there, and to start talking with case managers beforehand to make sure that they're aware of it, and that you're talking with providers so that providers can design how that's going to look. That also means that somebody could be a roommate and come in and actually live with the individual in their own apartments and offer those supports. That also means we will pay that person to come in and do that. There's a couple of different ways of doing that. One is through consumer-directed supports, consumer-directed assistance supports and services, or CDOS. And that one, you as a family member or you as the individual would actually hire and fire your own staff, and you would also be responsible for training them as well. And that sits in the SLS waiver. It does not in the DD waiver, but CDOS is also an option. Now, if you don't want to use CDOS and you still want to stay with a provider, which honestly, if it was me, I love CDOS. I love consumer direction. I think it is something that every state needs. I think we need to do more with it in Colorado. But if it was up to me, I would actually stick with providers, because I don't want to deal with the employment piece of things. And so in the SLS waiver, there's a whole set of services, including personal care, homemaker enhanced, a whole set of services that can be billed and reimbursed to support somebody in living in their own home, their own apartment, their own condo. And again, same thing flies here too. You can have that person either come in and come out, or you can work with a provider to hire somebody that will actually move in with you as the person needing the services and give you those services over a long period of time. I also know a lot about ways to flex housing stuff to actually make that cheaper, but I know we don't have time right now to talk about that. But if somebody is really worried about, okay, how's my loved one going to afford an apartment or a condo for the long term, please reach out to me. There's some flexibility within that, not from a waiver perspective, but from a housing voucher perspective that we can talk about.
Okay, related to the finances then is one question about whether Medicaid waivers can be used to help pay for college. And then similarly, kind of someone has a question about asset limits for things like Social Security and how an individual can pay for college if they have that $2,000 asset limit. And I think that one is where maybe the ABLE account and maybe Medicaid buy-in will come in. But so just if you could chat a little more about the financial side, I think people would find that helpful.
Absolutely. So remember when I was saying, I was actually kind of setting this up when I was talking in the beginning about thinking about Medicaid as a large insurance company. Medicaid will only pay for medical stuff. So it only reimburses for services that it has already approved. It does not pay for room and board, and it won't pay for college. That doesn't mean that you can't access waiver services while you're going to college. It just means that the waiver itself will not support that. As far as finances and all of those different types of things, the biggest thing that I would recommend is actually working with a benefits planner. A benefits planner is somebody who is highly trained in understanding Social Security as well as state Medicaid systems, and they can actually work through you and actually create a plan of how much you can earn, how those earnings will affect your public benefits, and kind of work back and forth. There's a couple of ways to access those. The easiest way is there is free benefits planning, and it just blinked in my head. But I can find that information. I'll get that to you, Shelby, so you can get that out. The other way, though, is to actually engage with DVR. DVR will pay for benefits planning, and they'll pay for a much larger, much more intensive benefits planning process. And they can do that even while they're trying to figure out eligibility for an individual. But I would highly recommend that you use either one of those, and they can really help you kind of figure out finances and kind of best ways to achieve the ultimate goal of somebody going and being part of a college campus and getting all the benefits from that.
Thanks. The next one is there a wait list for SLS waiver services?
So there is not a wait list for the SLS waiver. There is a wait list for the DD waiver. At the same time, I say there's not a wait list. However, if you are going to start today to enroll in the SLS waiver, you really are looking at between 9 to 12 months from start to finish, that being that you've talked to your case manager to actually services being able to start. Now, some of that changes a lot if you are already enrolled in a children's waiver and are just transitioning on to another waiver. The other thing is if you're on a children's waiver to transition into the DD waiver, you are already automatically given a spot on the DD waiver. But the basic answer is no, there is not a waiting list on the SLS waiver. That doesn't mean that services can start tomorrow if you start working on that stuff today. There's still quite a long process that needs to happen.
Okay, similar to that, is it easy to switch from one waiver to another?
It's not the easiest thing in the world, but once you kind of do it once, it becomes a lot easier. A lot of times service plans can just, they won't word for word be transitioned over because they just look differently, but a lot of the language and the understanding and the background and the goals and all of that kind of stuff, if that's already written in one and you're switching to another waiver, that information can absolutely be used. A lot of providers will provide services to multiple waivers, so that may even speed up. But I'm not going to lie, it can very much be a headache. At the same time, I also don't want that to mean that you're going to choose one waiver and stick to it. By God, I'm going to use this one waiver for the rest of my life. As needs change, as things change, we absolutely invite you to switch and move around in waivers when that's needed.
Thank you. And then there's several questions about like support in the college classroom. And the one thing I will say with this too is that the schools offering inclusive higher education also have some supports in place, but definitely we can talk a little bit about what that would look like, I think, with the waivers as well. So if you have more questions after this webinar, I can always point you towards other folks who can help answer more questions too about some subtle nuances and things in college classes. But Adam, I think you can also speak to that with just like mentorship services and what that would look like through waivers too.
Absolutely. And so classroom kind of support, as a person who went through college and used similar supports, I would highly recommend starting within and or with the services that are actually on campus. They are much more designed for that. They are much better set up and they already know professors, the people who work with them already know professors, different things like that. That doesn't mean that they can't be used. Things like personal care absolutely should be used during the day. If somebody's going between classes, somebody has a break in a class, utilize that personal care. That's something that I would highly recommend that you use waiver services for. I would really, especially if you're on the SLS waiver, really be thinking about a lot of these services more for the social aspect of things. How can a peer mentor really support somebody, a brand new freshman who's never lived by themselves before? How do you really support them in getting to know the other folks who are living in the dorm, to kind of get involved and get connected on campus? I would also mention that with mentorship and then peer mentorship, and peer mentorship has some different caveats to it, is that if you have a loved one that's going to college and they've gotten through that that initial freshman year, they're doing great, they're looking for maybe their first job, that's something that they should be thinking about. I mean, imagine the impact that somebody could have by helping that new freshman class coming in and really utilizing waiver services and being part of that system while getting paid to support somebody and really engaging in campus life. Hopefully that answered the question.
Mhm. I think so. And I think really you're hitting on the fact that it's very, very specific to each individual what exactly the support will look like. So I think that's
Yes.
something for folks to always chat about. So someone wants to know what would be good for a prospective student thinking about college, maybe to talk to their caseworker about, maybe as it relates to social function or just kind of how to have that conversation about what the support need might look like.
So I think that there are three kind of big things, and the first one is the most complicated one, and so I'm going to start there. I think it's really important that you are aware of what like is going to provide you through services compared to what the waiver can provide you. At the end of the day, one of the things the case manager has to watch for is that Medicaid is the payer of last resort, and we are literally federally defined as the payer of last resort. So what that means is that if there's a service that overlaps with one another, like if IN has a service that may look similar to what supported community connections might be, it's really important for the case manager to know that, so that you're writing goals and you're kind of defining how those services are going to look, so that they look different and they feel different than what inclusive higher education programs will give to somebody, so that there's never any question about, well, can we use the waiver service now? And you have a provider going, no, I can't provide that service in that setting. You just kind of want to make sure all of that's on the table. So as you're doing service planning, all of that can kind of be figured out so that you're not running into major issues later. The second one is making sure the case manager knows as soon as somebody is accepted into college and where that college campus is going to be, because some of that really is going to be about making sure that they're doing some remote case management to ensure that services are being provided. That also, and then the third one fits in with that one, but also the schedule of the year. When is the person who's on the waiver going to be back in their hometown, and what services are they going to need during that time, as compared to when are they going to be on their campus, and what services are they going to need there? The sooner you know that, the better you can plan out where those services fit in, how to manage those services, and also how to budget those services better. So those are kind of the big three when you were thinking about campus. The other one, though, that I just tell everybody is, what do you want to do in your life? What do you want to achieve in your life? Knowing that and starting that conversation with your case manager, your providers, and anybody else who will listen is super, super important. And then I also have one of my colleagues talking to me in my ear, and she would highly recommend that you guys start a notebook that only has Medicaid information and waiver information in it, and take notes. Any paper you get from us, put it in that notebook. If it's a 3-ring binder or whatnot, just make sure you keep it all in one place, so that as you're working within the system, you have the notes from the 2 meetings ago, and you can say, you said you were going to do this and it never happened, or man, we talked about this before, now we're really, really excited about doing it. So also really making sure you have a kind of central place where you're keeping notes and all of this information together.
Mm-hmm. And then one question that comes up often, sorry, I have questions coming all over the place, but this one is about if people are about losing services. So the idea about, like, if you're on a waiver, you go to college, do you have to use it to keep it? Kind of the whole entity. And I think there's lots of different things that people might know or not know about that.
So I'm going back here. So if you see on this one, it says under the participants receive services in the home and community. So for the DD and SLS waiver, you have to receive at least one service per calendar month. That does, now when I say that can literally be 15 minutes of somebody checking in with a job coach, or with somebody who's working with them on supported community connections. If you're on that EBD waiver, it's a one service every 30 days. So it's outside of the calendar. They start the clock after the last service. So just to be aware of that, there's also a lot of ways to kind of break that up. So if you're working within that calendar month, that just means that on the 29th, you're having that 15-minute conversation, and you're not having that conversation again until the 29th again the next month. So all of that can be utilized, but that's the basics.
All right. So it is 3 o'clock. So if you're still with us, thank you so much for attending. I will send you the recording, and I'll also make sure any of the references and things that were brought up, any links, anything else like that, the slides, it'll all come out sometime in like the next week or so. If there are other questions, I have those flagged, and I'll make sure that we send those out as well. And then Adam, I'll really leave it up to you if you want to answer any more questions, because it's your time. So it is 3 o'clock. There are a couple more, or we can just type those responses out and send them out to folks later.
Oh no, let's keep going. I do
Okay.
have a hard stop at 3:30, but
Okay.
but besides that, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Great. So yeah, if you all want to jump off, you can. If you want to stay, you can. But one of them is, what sort of job support services are available? Does it include job training, interview skills, other training?
So yes, and yes. And so through the 2 waivers, we have a category called supported employment, and then under supported employment, there are 3 different services. The first one is exactly what the question is referencing, and it's called job development. Job development is all about job exploration. It's about listening to the person and supporting the person and identifying what their employment and career goal is, along with kind of identifying what they need in what would be a good employment setting for them. And then that organization, those folks can also work with DVR and help through DVR to really help somebody actually get the job and get placed in the job. And then on the back end of that, we also have job coaching, which can continue even after closure from DVR to continue to support that person in the long term. All of these services can also be used at the same time. So somebody has a job coach, they've had a job for a few years, but man, they're getting tired of going to Target every day, or they want to make the next step in their career and really kind of jump into that. They can keep with job coaching and continue with that job. And then they can also utilize job development and re-engage in how to develop that plan for that next step in their career. And then the third service is job placement, which actually is utilized very rarely. And that one is really designed to buy goods and services that somebody may need to be successful at their job. We also have it really set up in the state of Colorado that most states, you want a job, you have to start with DVR. In the state of Colorado, as long as a referral is made to DVR, rapid engagement and waiver dollars can be utilized all the way up until the point that DVR opens the case. Then DVR kind of takes over and supports the person and gets them stable in their job, and then they close the case. And if the person still needs that job coaching support, they can come right back to the waiver and continue to utilize the waiver. That's my 5-second. I have entire 3-hour long presentations and all of this stuff. So if you guys are ever interested in that, please let me know.
Yeah. And going back to, I missed these ones about the moving between waivers. Someone wants to know, is the 6 to 12 month wait true for the BI waiver too? Why does it take so long?
I would honestly say that 6 to 9 months is a good rule of thumb for all the waivers, and that's just because of what goes into it. It's not even just about eligibility. It's about writing up a service plan and then figuring out what services somebody needs so that that fits with that service plan. Then it's about finding the providers and which providers can work with this person, who has the ability and the space to work with this person. Then finally that gets finalized, and then from there the waiver dollars are turned on, and then services can start. That it's just a process, and we're always working to try to make that shorter, but just the process itself takes time. If there is something legitimately big happening in somebody's life, like they're going to go off to college, I would call case management agency, get engaged, and let them know that right at the beginning, and then they can speed things up as much as they can. I can't guarantee you can do it in like a 3-month, kind of period, like a summer, but they can speed things up as well. But a good rule of thumb is 6 to 9 months with all the waivers. Now, if you're jumping between waivers, some of that can actually be sped up a little bit. But it's just process. It's bureaucracy. I mean, we are bureaucrats at the end of the day. So.
And what happens when members run into roadblocks or barriers to service? So, for example, our department doesn't do that, or who do you call then if they're kind of telling you someone else does that?
If it's not your case manager saying that, I would start with your case manager. If it is your case manager saying that, or you're not getting a response from your case manager, honestly, the next best step is to either move up that case management chain or to contact us. Email me. I probably support people with questions like that probably 3 or 4 times a week. And so, yeah, there's a couple of different ways. I'm also not going to sugarcoat it and say that everything is going to be perfect. Our system is really evolving very, very quickly, but it's still a little bit behind the times. And so also know that you are going to hit those roadblocks, but to have as much patience as possible. I know patience runs thin very quickly, and I totally understand that. And just always fall back on, nope, this is what I want. These are the goals and the things that I want to achieve in my life. We need to work together to figure out how the waiver and waiver services can really help me do that.
Okay, it looks like there's just a couple more. This one is there any assistance provided for college entrance exams? And the one thing I will note here is that with inclusive higher education, there is no requirement to have a college entrance exam, and many students probably aren't even taking those exams. But I know there's probably folks who are still on who maybe their student will be accessing college a different way, who maybe the entrance exam applies for. So I don't know if that's part of waivers or not, but that was one of the questions.
That, absolutely. I think that depending on if we're talking about like the SAT and the ACT, or we're talking about more specific to the university itself, somebody on the supported community connections could absolutely help somebody with actually going with them if they need that support around test anxiety. Waiver service could also support somebody with getting actually diagnosed with test anxiety and some of the treatments for that. I personally use treatments for test anxiety when I have to take tests. That's why I don't take tests anymore. The other thing that can absolutely be helpful is there's quite a few services that could absolutely be utilized to help the person study and prepare for that. That could be peer mentorship, that could be mentorship, but there's also some, honestly, specialized tab could absolutely do that. So yeah, it's more about identifying that as something that is a need, and really working with providers or your case manager about figuring out exactly what's needed so that waiver services can be identified to support that person.
Thank you, Adam. And the last one I see, there's still 22 people, so if anyone has one more question, but otherwise this is the last one. If someone is able to have mentor support, if someone is able to have a mentor supporting them, advocating with their instructor in the college classroom, does that mean they can have a person with them in classes to also support academically?
Yes and no. Again, I would the first step in all of that would be to make sure that there isn't an alternative or a different fund. It all comes down to funding sources, right? We're talking about federal bureaucracy and federal money. So it always comes down to funding sources. If there are alternative ways to get that support through the school, then you have to try that first. If those don't work, and that can be documented of why they don't work, then absolutely waiver services can come in and help do that. It kind of depends too, I think, really on kind of the, if it's more of a tech kind of class, like a welding class or different things like that, one service that could be utilized is pre-vocational services, because under that definition, it's all about supporting somebody in the soft skills they need to go on and be employed. So going and making sure you're dressed correctly, making sure you're meeting deadlines, making sure that that you understand things. All of those are soft skills for employment, and so pre-voc can also be utilized in some of that. I would not use pre-voc in any other way, even though it's offered in other ways. There's lots of studies that show that actually pre-voc disrupts people's ability to earn in the long term. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate that somebody go and use a more traditional pre-voc, but pre-voc could absolutely be used in a classroom along with mentorship, supporting community connections, all of those kinds of things. Just be really cautious that really make sure that you know all your resources, and if that's the resource that is going to work the best, that you have justification of why that's going to work the best over these other resources. And to tell you the God's honest truth, the system still has the right to say, nope, that's not going to work. You still have to go and utilize the on-campus supports. If that's the case, you can still use waiver supports to support the person and advocating for the supports they need on campus. I know that gets crazy, but you can absolutely do that as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions I see. I just want to say, for folks who are still on, I have talked to lots of college students who are using waivers, and from everyone that I talk to, it is really incredibly helpful. So if you're feeling like, wow, this is overwhelming, or this is a really long process and things, I think the majority of folks would tell you that going through that process ends up really being worthwhile to have those supports, whether you're going to college or not even. And then thank you, Adam, so much for your time and for answering all the questions. Yeah.
Shelby, can I just mention one more thing?
Yes,
I also
please.
want to mention too, let me get through all of this. So just before we hop off, I also want to mention that in that PowerPoint that you guys are going to get, this section is in there. This has a whole bunch of links to different things like waiver charts and flow charts. And these things will really kind of show you exactly what's offered in each waiver. Here are some links to find out who your closest single entry point or your closest CCB is. Here's a link to all of our rules, and actually the actual waiver document, you can find that as well in this. And then here's some more rules, but then here's some other programs. So like CDOS, I mentioned, here's a whole web page just on CDOS. So also this PowerPoint was really designed not so much to be something that I can sit and talk to, but much more about being a resource. And so here's some web resources, and then here's my contact. Yours is going to have Jen Larson, but it's also going to have this link underneath where this actual presentation has been recorded. The long version of it has been recorded and is on our website. And you can also go and find the PowerPoint on our website. So I just wanted to mention that stuff is embedded in here as well. Cool.
Cool. Well,
thanks,
thank
everybody.
you so much.
Yeah, this is great.
All right.
We'll talk soon.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.